Thanks for joining us for CBN News Today. I'm Charlene Israel.
And I'm Ephraim Graham. It was a symbol of hope and grace for many after the 9/11 attacks. Talking about the World Trade Center cross, it was set to be included in the new World Trade Center Museum opening this year. But a group of atheists is now suing the museum to keep the cross out. Dale Hurd has the story.
It's been called the Miracle Cross, formed by two beams from the World Trade Center. The new 9/11 museum wants to put it in its building next year, and most people love the idea.
I lost my good friend, Father Michael Judge, the fire department chaplain. I lost 10 other friends, and this was a sign of consolation. It was never meant to hurt anyone, hurt the atheists, or anything like that.
But atheists say they were hurt. The lawyer for American Atheists says the plaintiffs were suffering physical and emotional pain as a result of the cross, including indigestion, depression, headaches, and anxiety. In court, their lawyer said the artifact screams Christianity. He went on to propose a plaque be included in the museum that would read, "Atheists died here too."
What we have here is a definite consecrated religious object. It is not a historical artifact.
But a panel of judges asked what's the difference between a cross at the 9/11 museum and religious objects in other public museums. A lawyer for the 9/11 museum argued rescue workers had a horrific experience after 9/11. They took some comfort in this object. He also argued a plaque for atheists might sound nice, but it's not justified.
Museums don't censor history, they don't make up history, they tell history as it happened, and the cross is part of the history, and a plaque is not.
The 9/11 museum is slated to open in May. The atheist case was thrown out by a U.S. district judge last year, but the atheist filed an appeal. Dale Hurd, CBN News.
Turning now to Ukraine, Russian President Vladimir Putin isn't responding to increasing pressure. He backed away from his invasion into parts of that country. In an hour-long phone conversation with Putin, President Obama proposed a diplomatic solution that included direct talks between Ukraine and Russia, Russian forces returning to their bases, and international monitors in Ukraine. Meanwhile, 6 U.S. fighter jets are now in Lithuania to bolster air patrols over the Baltics, and a U.S. warship is in the Black Sea to participate in long-planned exercises. Still, pro-Russian authorities have pushed Crimea's parliament to call for a referendum to the public to officially vote to become part of Russia, but the U.S. and European Union leaders aren't going to recognize that vote.
Meanwhile, Ukraine's interim president, Alexander Turchinov, a devout evangelical Christian, told the Billy Graham Association stories of God's hand abound in the midst of the Ukrainian crisis. He asked that believers worldwide to pray for us so that peace would return and people would be able to live peacefully. He said he hoped for victory without an armed conflict with Russia based on the biblical promise, "If God is with us, no one can be against us." You can find a link to the complete interview at our website, cbnnews.com.
Well, the crisis in Ukraine pits East versus West, but as often happens in a crisis, Jewish people are caught in the middle.
However, there are groups that are giving them help as well as hope. CBN News' Chris Mitchell from Jerusalem now.
While the images of Russian troops, protests, and barricades dominate the news, behind the scenes, another drama is playing out.
The Jews are afraid. All across the Ukraine, there's a fear, not a panic, but there's a fear that they'll be blamed for a lot of the problems that are taking place in the Ukraine right now.
The Jewish people in Ukraine know their history and have a reason to fear. Nearly 1 million Ukrainian Jews were killed during the Holocaust, and more than 30,000 of them in the infamous Babi Yar massacre in Kiev in 1941. Now, once again, they see foreign troops on their soil.
When they see an invader coming in who has a hatred for Jewish people, they become afraid.
Michael Otterbeck serves with 2 organizations that have helped more than 130,000 Jews emigrate from the former Soviet Union to Israel since 1991. He says now many more are looking for a way out to go to the Jewish state.
We have 15 full-time workers and hundreds of volunteers that are working with the Jews that are scattered all across the Ukraine. And we brought out tens of thousands from there. And recently we have seen the people asking for assistance. That number has doubled since all of this has gone on. And they're calling day and night, asking for someone to help them to know how to immigrate to Israel.
Otterbeck says despite the crisis, prophecy is being fulfilled.
If you pull back from all of this and you look at what really is taking place from a spiritual perspective, we're watching prophecy come to pass before our very eyes. And God promised that there would come a day when the Jews would have to come back to their own land.
He says it's time to pray for the Ukraine.
And I believe that if believers all over the world would begin praying for the Ukraine, that God would help them in the situation that they are in, and pray that God would spread that throughout the nation and that righteousness would reign once again over that land.
Chris Mitchell, CBN News, Jerusalem.
Back here in our own New Jersey, Republican Governor Chris Christie wowed the crowd at the Conservative Political Action Conference Thursday, telling the audience it's time to stop letting the media define the conservative message.
The reason we have to start talking about what we're for and not continuing to rail against what we're against is because of one simple reason. Our ideas are better than their ideas, and that's what we have to stand up for.
CPAC is the largest gathering of conservatives each year. Among those set to speak this year, Rand Paul and Marco Rubio. Texas Senator Ted Cruz kicked off the event by telling the GOP it is time to stand up for something.
You want to lose elections, stand for nothing. The one election that was a tremendous election was 2010, when Republicans drew a line in the sand. We said we stand unequivocally against Obamacare, against bankrupting the country, and we won an historic tidal wave of an election.
Our chief political correspondent, David Brody, is at CPAC. He'll bring us a complete wrap-up after the event. And for more from David, be sure to check out his blog, The Brody File. It's at cbnnews.com.
The Obamacare insurance marketplaces are failing to sign up uninsured Americans. That's the finding from two new surveys. The Washington Post reports one survey shows only 10% of uninsured Americans have signed up, and nearly 90% of those who bought insurance on the Obamacare exchanges said they were just switching from an existing plan. The Obamacare online process does not allow applicants to say whether they're uninsured. March 31st is the deadline to sign up for insurance, but the Obama administration keeps rewriting the rules to delay political fallout until after the fall elections. This week, they decided people can keep their insurance plans even if they don't meet the requirements of the law.
The House of Representatives has blocked President Obama's plan to limit carbon pollution from the new power plants. The Electricity Security and Affordability Act passed the Republican-controlled House Thursday. It aims at the heart of the Obama administration's plan to combat climate change by cracking down on carbon emissions. The EPA's regulations to fight global warming are crippling the coal industry, so much so that some are accusing the president of a war on coal. Some economists warn it could also be a war on manufacturing and other businesses too, and it could drive up your utility bills. Paul Strand has the story from Washington.
The Environmental Protection Agency decided in late 2009 that carbon dioxide is a pollutant, and therefore the agency could regulate it under the Clean Air Act. The Supreme Court backed this controversial idea, and that set the EPA loose to impose numerous regulations on important industries. For instance, it's come out with regulations so strict on new coal plants, some in Congress say it amounts to a war on coal.
This war on coal is going to cost thousands of jobs, those that work in the mining industry, as well as those that are dependent upon the affordable, reliable electricity that coal provides.
Is the EPA the Environmental Protection Agency, or does it really stand for the Employment Prevention Agency?
Coal gives America 40% of its electricity. Hobbling it is sure to mean higher energy prices.
It is fundamentally immoral for the federal government to put hard-working, middle-class American families into economic distress. And that is exactly what this war on coal does.
Let's talk about our senior citizens on fixed incomes. If these regulations go forth, it is going to be impossible for them to cool their homes in the summer and heat them in the winter.
So if you want to take low-income working moms and dads, single parents, and make their lives more miserable, more difficult, make their paychecks go less far, these are the regulations that will do it.
But the EPA and its allies warn unfettered global warming will destroy crops, unleash numerous superstorms even worse than Sandy, and be much more devastating to the economy. Still, some lawmakers say there's a deeper issue, that rule by regulation from the presidential administration, rather than legislation from Congress, is also dangerous for democracy.
When we separated powers, Montesquieu said if you let the executive legislate, there'll be a type of a tyranny. This is a type of a tyranny. We will fight it, not just because it's bad for jobs and bad for coal, but because it goes against everything we stand for.
Many say the boom in cleaner natural gas means it can replace coal. And some in the natural gas industry who put big money into this war on coal are cheering now.
And the natural gas industry thought they were very clever. We've kneecapped coal. Now everything will switch to natural gas and we'll make a fortune.
Phil Kerpen, author of Democracy Denied.
Well, the Sierra Club has since announced the sequel to their Beyond Coal campaign. It's called Beyond Natural Gas. And now they're saying they will sue to stop every single natural gas plant from being sited in this country.
When President Obama got elected, he campaigned on a plan that said under my plan, electricity rates would necessarily skyrocket. His former Secretary of Energy said he'd like to see European-style gasoline prices. Recently, a chief advisor said that a war on coal is exactly what we need.
And we're going to continue fighting in a bipartisan way to block the Obama administration's attempt at not only this war on coal, but a war on all American energy.
A major reason Congress hasn't fought much against global warming is there's no consensus in Congress on how much man can really fight the threat or even how real it is. But the EPA believes wholeheartedly in that threat, which Kerpen thinks is amazing as it's all based on computer projections that may not be right.
And the idea that we're going to make people suffer, make them pay higher energy bills every single month because of a computer model that could be totally wrong, claims there's a benefit 300 years from now. It's a crazy way to do business, and you know these models get changed all the time. The next version of them could say something totally different.
Paul Strand, CBN News, Washington.
In Kansas, religious leaders are asking the legislature to pass legal protections for believers to refuse goods and services for same-sex marriages because of their religious convictions. Since a federal judge forced Kansas to recognize gay marriages from other states, they're concerned about the future of religious freedom in their state. The Catholic, Presbyterian, Mormon, and Baptist leaders said they don't condone unjust treatment of anybody. The state Senate held hearings this week, but the president said the debate will have to wait until next year.
Purdue University has agreed to keep the word God in a plaque honoring a major donor. Dr. Michael McCracken gave more than $12,000 to the school. Purdue asked him to provide wording for a plaque in his honor. It read, "To all those who seek to better the world through the understanding of God's physical laws and innovation of practical solutions." Purdue sought to remove the word God from the plaque, but McCracken sued, claiming the school had violated the First Amendment. The inscription will clarify that the quote is McCracken's and not the school's.
Coming up, war zone in South Sudan, how it's affecting the aid efforts of Samaritan's Purse, and what's next for the ministry.
Gunfire in an army barracks disturbed the fragile peace in Juba, South Sudan this week. A spokesman for the South Sudan military said a pay dispute got out of hand. 5 South Sudan soldiers are dead and hundreds are under arrest after their demand for back pay escalated into violence. Meanwhile, government and rebel negotiators continue peace talks in Ethiopia. The peace has held long enough to allow some international aid agencies to return to Juba, including Franklin Graham's Samaritan's Purse.
And joining us by Skype is Ken Isaac, Vice President of International Projects and Government Relations for Samaritan's Purse. Ken, Samaritan's Purse has been in South Sudan for more than 20 years before it was even a country. The conditions must have been pretty bad to force your folks to leave.
Well, the war started on December the 15th. This is a civil war that we're talking about now in the world's newest nation. And it was so dangerous and chaotic that we pulled our staff, our expatriate staff, back to Nairobi around December the 20th, and we kept them there for about 3 weeks until we could sort of figure out where we could go back to, what we could do, and how we could keep our folks alive. But we were able to maintain essential services that we were providing to over 200,000 refugees.
In terms of the work you're doing, describe what kind of work is being done in South Sudan and how the fighting and evacuation affected that work.
Well, the main things that we are involved in are providing clean water, feeding people. We're running a hospital in one area. And since the fighting, there are now over 900,000 more displaced people. So when we returned, the humanitarian need, the landscape of that need had changed quite a bit, and we're now trying and are in fact responding in different areas in addition to what we were doing before. So really our workload has grown due to the conflict.
Well, I can only imagine. Now, you had about 600 local staff that remained. How are they able to continue the work?
Well, we had worked with them for years. They're trained. We formed management teams with our expatriate staff, and they had ongoing contact with them every day while they were in Nairobi. And we've got good staff. The Lord has blessed us with good folks, and they're committed, they're brave, they're courageous, and they're very skilled.
Ken, what role is the church playing in helping the country through this crisis?
That's a great question. In Juba, the capital city where the fighting started, and reports are that 10 to 20,000 people were perhaps killed, massacred there. There are many pastors who fled, and they are in these settlement camps or these displacement camps. And we have identified 150 of them that we are helping them and their families. And these pastors are coming together, holding reconciliation conferences with other church leaders. That is something that we are encouraging across the nation. We're supporting it and helping it in all ways that we can. And I think that the church, the body of Christ, is a very important, if not the most important, influence in the entire political situation and the conflict that's going on there now.
Indeed. We're just about out of time, but real quickly, tell us about the work you're pursuing now and how our viewers can help.
Well, in Uganda, for an example, and there are many examples, so I can't go into all of them, but 80,000 refugees have fled from South Sudan down into Uganda. We're feeding 50,000 of them there. In Juba, we're helping orphans. We're helping women who have small children. In Bar Ghazal, we're drilling wells. In Lake State, we're providing clean water and sanitation to hundreds of thousands of people. We're still feeding refugees in Yida, and we're feeding refugees in Maban, as well as running a hospital there. If people would like to know more, they can go to SamaritansPurse.org.
All right, Ken Isaacs of Samaritan's Purse, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for letting me be here today.
Up next, Son of God, why this may be a great weekend to take your family to the theater.
And the weekend is here, so it's time for our regular family-friendly movie reviews with Bob Waliszewski. He's Director of Focus on the Family's Entertainment Review Department called Plugged In Online. Bob, let's talk first about the new animation called Mr. Peabody and Sherman. What you think?
You know, I can recall watching in the 60s as part of the Rocky and Bullwinkle show, the shorts Mr. Peabody and Sherman. The animation was pretty cheesy, and they always ended with some kind of cheesy as well pun. Didn't go into the screening with a whole lot of expectations, but I walked out and I was like, huh. That wasn't too bad. And especially wouldn't have been too bad if I'd have been a 10 or a 12 or maybe even up to a 14-year-old in the film. Essentially, it's this. Mr. Peabody is a genius dog and has an adopted boy named Sherman, and they have a time travel machine. They call it the Wayback Machine. And they've time traveled so much that Sherman has met the likes of Gandhi and George Washington and Van Gogh and Jackie Robinson. And the first day of his school class, he puts his hand up a lot to answer questions, not because he knows it so much from memory, is because he remembers meeting the people and remembers what they said. A girl doesn't believe him. He ends up accidentally admitting or saying that he had met George Washington, and of course he then becomes bullied for that. Eventually they time travel together and have all sorts of adventures, like I said, that turned out to be fairly clever. From a family perspective, gave this one a 4 out of 5, knocked it down for some bathroom humor, and there's a bit of parental disrespect early on. I think families can walk through this one fairly well with Mr. Peabody and Sherman. Rated PG, I might add.
All right, before we go, Son of God is doing very well in theaters. Of course, it is about the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus, so it has graphic violence. What are your recommendations for families?
Well, that's a really great question. It was a #2 film, by the way, last week with a $26.5 million take at the box office. I'm so glad that it did that well. As far as age appropriateness, I've been saying roughly around the age of 12 on up. Now, when I saw it, I happened to notice that there was a much younger boy in the audience, and I recently read an email from a family that took a 7- and a 9-year-old who were just saying that their kids loved it, and the 7-year-old had crawled up in the mom's lap during the crucifixion scene, and she thought it was perfectly acceptable. Personally, I think that was a little bit young. When I'm reading that email, when I'm seeing that boy in the screening, I thought, I don't think I would have done it. It's not in Passion of the Christ territory as far as the gruesomeness of the flogging or the gruesomeness of the crucifixion, but it's certainly a lot more so than, say, you'd find in the Jesus film.
Indeed, indeed. Bob, thank you so much. We'll see you next week.
You bet.
Finally, former New York Yankee Mariano Rivera is scoring big, but not on the field this time.
Now, the retired baseball star is celebrating the new church he bought and rebuilt with his own funds. The city of New Rochelle sold the abandoned Presbyterian church building to Rivera for $1. He invested $3 million in what's now the Refuge Hope Church. The Pentecostal church is headed by his wife, Clara. Rivera calls it a privilege to fulfill a dream that God put in their hearts.
This is totally in a different level. You know, this is to help families, to bring people close to the Lord.
My jaw dropped. It's obvious that an enormous amount of love and care and attention has been poured into this church.
And the church will also provide educational and sports-oriented after-school activities. New York City's mayor credits Rivera, with New Rochelle's mayor credits him with being able to save that building, preserving a key part of New Rochelle's history while playing a role in that city's future as well.
Absolutely beautiful.
It is gorgeous, gorgeous.
Praise the Lord.
And to do that on your own.
On your own.
Beautiful.
Praise God. Well, that's it for now on CBN News Today. You can find more of our exclusive coverage of the issues you care most about at cbnnews.com.
Have a fabulous Friday and a wonderful weekend.